Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Field Coach Experts podcast. This is the place where franchisors and field teams come to learn how to build stronger systems, stronger coaches, and have more confident franchisees. So I am, as usual, Jen Brannon, your host from here at AC Inc. And today we are diving into a topic that doesn't get talked about nearly enough in franchising. And I think it is something that we see a lot of, and my guest and I are going to talk a lot about that today. It's how great operators don't always automatically make great coaches. And we see so often brands when they are trying to find coaches for their franchisees, look at, people like me. I was a franchisee that did pretty well, and I would think I have a nice personality and people tend to like me. And it's like, okay, great. Let's put this person in as a coach. But nobody ever taught me any coaching skills, and who knew if I was going to be a good coach or not, just because I was a really solid operator. And we know that coaching just isn't about the operations or the playbook. It's about those human skills, influence, persuasion, timing, trust, and really knowing when to not just tell, give the answer, and problem solve with your franchisees. So we're going to get into a little bit about that human side of coaching and what we see happening and what's people are doing well, and maybe where those opportunities are. So I'm really excited today because I have our newest member here at AC Inc., Chris Pace, who has literally just joined the team. He's only been with us for a few weeks. And so happy to talk to you today, Chris. And welcome to your first podcast with me.
Yeah, no, I'm so excited to be here, Jen. This is an exceptional opportunity, and I'm so excited to be on the team. So thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, your background, and what really brought you to AC Inc.?
Sure. So I'm a former restaurant operator. I was slinging burritos for Chipotle, and I started my franchising roots with Qdoba. So that's I've got an operator's background, an operator's heart. And then I got the chance to join a company called CCA Global Partners, and they've got a franchise brand called ProSource Wholesale, where I was a field coach. And so I spent several years doing that before I got into building tiny homes and then consulting in that industry as well. And then I actually had seen Angela through one of the summits that she had been a keynote speaker at. I saw some of her content, and so I started following AC Inc. And then you guys listed for an advisor position, and we went through plenty of conversations to get here. It was fantastic. Got to know you and the team and the culture and what we do, and just like I said, just an exceptional value that we're bringing to the franchise industry.
Amazing. Yeah, we're all really excited to have you on board. You just immediately was kind of like, this is our people. So we know that he's going to fit in well with our team, and that's absolutely true. So again, happy to have you. So let's get in to it, and I want to talk about that myth that I kind of alluded to at the top. Is that we think, or in franchising, we think that someone who either maybe they were a franchisee and they were a great operator, so they were a good franchisee from that standpoint, or maybe they're an industry professional. So, for instance, in restaurants, oh, this person has owned their own restaurant, or maybe they just were management at a restaurant. They would be a good coach because they've got lots of restaurant experience. So can you just talk a little bit about why that myth exists, and why is it just a myth and maybe not absolutely a fact?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing is a lot of people take for granted how simple the systems are. And so when they see a good operator, they assume, or maybe they don't understand how the list to be operated on actually got made. And so one of the things that I've always adopted as a field coach and even in operations is there's a type of person that can manage to a list and actually execute, and then there's the person that can actually write the list. So I think one of the fundamentals is, between someone who's a good operator and may or may not be a good coach is first determining whether or not they can decipher between executing on the list and building the list themselves, which really comes down to systems, prioritization, critical thinking, and really knowing what the table stakes of that business are. Because there's a lot of ways to be busy as an operator, but there's only a few ways to be really effective. And I think coaches have to teach to that, and they only get so many steps up at the plate before they strike out on that and they lose credibility. So that a coach really has to be thoughtful about what they're layering out for their operators.
Right. I think that is definitely true, because as we know, and anybody who's listened to our podcast, we are constantly talking about that mistake that we make in that coaching is actually training or teaching operations.
Right.
And that's not what coaching is, right? Coaching
Agreed.
is there's times when we have to train our franchisees or teach our franchisees. But when that is what coaching is viewed at, that's where we are really making a mistake, because of all the reasons. I mean, we've talked about this a lot in podcasts, but it's really about empowering franchisees in order to sometimes, and a lot of the time, when it's not just kind of, okay, how can I word it? When it's fundamental stuff that they're not going to be able to figure out on their own, right? They just don't know. We've got to train them on that. But a lot of times it's empowering them by asking questions and getting them to come to their own conclusions and figure things out, and to use our influence and persuasion to guide them to that. And, I think that piece is missing when we are just focused solely on the operations. Because as we know, right, good operators aren't always great business owners and aren't
Sure.
always driving growth. So, if you put yourself in a position where you are a coach, you are a great operator over here that's now had your first role as a coach, what do you think some of those common transition traps you're gonna fall into in that kind of first experience?
Well, I think, and that's a really good question, and it's complex because there's a lot of ways and there's a lot of traps to fall into. I think probably the first one is understanding that ultimately you report to the process and not to any one person. And I think that's tough because sometimes you go out there as an advisor or a coach, and you're not in your operating shoes, and you quickly want to make connections with people, build trust with people, and sometimes you do that by being liked, which also means being easy. And the trap of that is then you're not really doing the system or the process any justice, because what you're ultimately there is to help drive a result through the operations, through the coaching, through the operator themselves. And so I think a lot of times people want to do the fishing themselves. They get in there and they start fishing alongside, maybe body doubling them instead. And, while that maybe, like you said, maybe that's a piece of it, maybe part of it is the training, but you've really got to be able to step back and teach them how to fish themselves.
Yeah, exactly. We do a lot of wanting to fix problems, as opposed to maybe even listening to and figuring out the why behind that, and then empowering those franchises. It's like, this is your problem. Oh, I dealt with that when I was a manager or a franchisee. Here's what you should do. There's a way also of using that in a coaching style, as opposed to just like the telling. And again, every time we talk about this is not a one size fits all. You always have to do it. There's always going to be opportunities where you are going to say things like you do have some expertise. It's just a matter of when it's quite often that's the only style of coaching that I think we get into a trap. And so I think to your point, really, coaches have a hard time when they are so strong in operations, letting go of the actual doing of the things. And so
Absolutely.
they do for
Yeah.
the franchisees. Yeah,
Yeah,
for
there's a
sure.
different type of validation there. And I think that's where, that's one of the mental shifts that has to occur is your validation is not you getting the checklist done, you working through
Mhm.
the thing. It's you seeing, it's kind of like parenting. It's you seeing your children take on and, they do the chores now because you've taught them how to do chores. It's one of those. So,
So if we are shifting away from being that technical advisor, if you will, or teacher with our franchisees, and we're shifting that over into the human skills. So as a coach, if I'm actually going to be coaching a franchisee, what are the human skills? And we do a lot. You're going through right now the field coach certification program,
mhm.
and because you are going to be one of our great facilitators at some point in the very near future. What are some of those human skills either that we are teaching in that program or that you just know this is what we need as really effective coaches with our franchisees?
Yeah, I think number one is the ability to truly listen, to
Mm.
really understand and hear what the people are saying and what they're not saying. A lot of times, it's what they're not saying will tell you just as much as what they do say. I think another thing is empathy. I know that's a buzzword and it's used a lot often, but it's never been more important to really understand where people are coming from, how they're really feeling about their situation, so that you can truly engage. And the third thing is critical thinking. You've really
Mm.
got to take a critical eye to the business, an objectivity that allows you to see things not through that operator's lens of control, right? And that's ultimately what I think a coach has to get rid of, that idea of that control, because you have none, and that's okay. We should celebrate that. It's what you fill the space with that really makes the difference in that operation, because you can influence it in such a positive way if you're objective, you're thinking about things critically, you're listening to the people, because then when you actually do speak and they listen, they'll understand that there's a communication where they trust you and they
Mm.
want to listen to you, and that's ultimately the fuel that gets you through those really tough moments where someone goes, but I'm too busy, but I tried that, it doesn't work in my market, all the different common things that get said, and they really go, but you're telling me I still need to push through. And that's ultimately what that relationship means, is you've got a partner to push through.
Yes. Can you talk more about trust? I think that it doesn't get enough recognition about how valuable and important it is when your franchisees trust you and you're in that role of their I always love to say the role of a coach is actually an accountability partner, an
Yes.
accountability partner to help that franchisee do what they need to do to grow their business.
hmm
So why do we need trust?
Well, I think we need trust because we're doing hard things and we have to believe in something that we can't really control, we can't really surmise is going to happen. And so without that trust, I mean, another word for trust is also faith, and it's getting through to the things that are unseen because you really feel or intuit that this is the right direction. When
Mhm.
you have that accountability partner that you can trust, you're not alone in doing that. And I think that's such the key role. A lot of times I've met and experienced and interacted with a lot of field coaches, and there's field coaches that are very base level that go in and just teach and train. And then there are coaches that manage coach really high level organizations, and they do it in such a soft skills way that they make a massive impact, but they don't really do anything. They don't pick up a hammer, so to speak, right? And
Yes.
and I think what the trust gives you the ability to span that gap. And I think building trust is it's a little scientific and a lot artful, but at the end of the day, it really comes down to being reliable, being objective, and really telling someone. And this is kind of the hard part, especially for new field coaches. You talk about traps. Telling people the honest truth about their operation and maybe even their own characteristics or their own attributes
Mhm.
that either help or hinder what's actually going on. A lot of times the bottlenecks are the operators themselves because they have limiting beliefs or limiting
Mhm.
expectations and they can't break through that. So that trust is literally, that's like the TNT on the wall of progress. You blow it up because you got that trust.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And one of the things that I love in a coach, and I think it's so powerful, is the ability to do all of those things and do it in a way that we're asking the questions.
Oh yeah.
Right. So you talk about how so often we see the franchisee is the bottleneck. They can't keep a team, or they're in their own way, or whatever. And even if we have lots of trust and we say it's you, that could affect the relationship. We have
sure.
to see. I mean, we all know our relationships with our franchisees, and there's some people that they're straight talkers. They want to hear it, right? Like
Yeah.
these are important soft skills as well. Is having that ability to understand your franchisee and
Yeah.
where they're at, and be able to know, how do I approach this franchisee? What is gonna resonate the best with them? Sometimes it is that straight, honest, direct truth. Others, no way. You cannot talk to them like that. I mean, and in just that, because it's going to hurt their feelings or whatever. But when we're asking questions, our goal is, in this instance, right, is to get that franchisee to realize it for themselves.
Yeah.
And we can do that when we're coaching using those really strong, open-ended questions. One thing I wanted to go back to, because you said something really important here, is when you were talking about the level of a coach that is coaching those big guys, those top performers, the ones that maybe they have been around for a long time and are great operators, maybe even great business owners. One of the things we see a lot is brands don't coach them.
Yeah.
Or they don't want to be coached. And let's talk about that. Why do you think they don't want to be coached, or they're not going to show up to coaching?
Yeah, well, I think at the end of the day, they think they got the answer. So wherever they're operating, whatever level they're executing at, they think that's it. And any iterations that are going to come from that are going to come internally. They've already kind of got that, and they kind of go off on an island, you know. And just because you can go on the island and build your hut and live sustainably doesn't necessarily mean that you don't need the resources of the island chain. You know, I like to say, and it's not my quote, but all of us is smarter than one of us. You know.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
but a lot of times, and you got to throw it at the franchisors a little bit too, because if they allow them to go out and gravitate too far away, you know, you got to ask the two questions. Number one, are they creating the value that they should? And two, are they listening and actually supporting, you know, the franchisee as they should as well? If you can say yes to those two, and that person is just still on the island, I think there's a tough conversation ahead. It's a critical conversation to pull them back in and ask them how we can define value again and treat that, you know, and what we can learn from them and what we can also, you know, share with them so they can improve.
Yeah. And you said a key word, value. And I've told this story before. I was a top performing franchisee. I was a great operator, and I was a good business owner as well. And one of my last brands would send me coaches, and I had an ego. I was like, what is this young girl gonna tell me about my business?
Right.
And the thing was that the approach that she was taking, and she won me over, was, I'm not here to tell you about your business. I'm not here to look at your operation, you know, with a magnifying glass. I am here to work with you to help you figure out where you want to take this business.
Yeah.
And then I'm just your partner. I'm your accountability partner, I always say, in how are you going to get there, and how can I help, whether that's, you know, with different resources or things, or even to bounce ideas off of, or I'm just there to support that and to help you maybe think through things, ask you key questions so that you can kind of figure it out where you want to go. There was value in that. I started showing up to my coaching calls because I wanted to. If your franchisees are not showing up, it's because they're not thinking there's value in it. If that person came to me and wanted to look at my operations with the magnifying glass, at the time I would have been like, no, I'm not interested in that. You know, 'cause
Right.
Right. Even though I'm not saying she couldn't come in and help me and maybe streamline some things. I'm not saying there wasn't any value in that, but that was my perceived value
Of
as a
course.
franchisee with a little bit of ego back then.
Yeah, you
For
bet.
sure. So, I think, yeah, those are all really great kind of human skills. I think we need to. I mean, there's the key one that I want us to focus on. I want your input. Is what does it mean to be able to build the trust and the rapport and be an effective coach without authority?
Yeah, the word that comes to mind is alignment, and I think ultimately that comes from, again, I'll pull out listening again, but it's the ability to engage someone as a professional and really listen to what they're going through and what their real struggles are, so that there's nothing more disengaging for someone to tell you and download everything. It'd be like you as an operator, you're telling that field coach, hey, hey, this is what's going on in my business and blah blah blah, and this is up and this is down, and then they say, well, let's focus on your cleaning list. And you're like, whoa, did you hear nothing? And then that creates disengagement. And I think, on the flip side, it's so simple yet so missed sometimes to really listen to what they're saying. Like, someone might be complaining about sales that are down, but then what you're hearing is you haven't been able to keep that third sales chair filled for more than 3 months because you've got turnover. Now I know my problem isn't people suck, people don't want to work these days, the manager's too hard, people, whatever the case is. They know, hey, we've got a training issue. And so an effective coach can sit back and say, hey, Jen, tell me about your training program. The last time you onboarded these last 3 employees that didn't work out, how did that work? How did you support them? What did you learn? Did you do an exit interview? There's so many different things that you can do that help you align. And then that builds that trust so that, as things get bigger and they want to share more with you, they being the franchisee, you're able to address things more effectively and objectively and give them that feedback that they need, that they come to rely on you. And I say this in a very serious fashion, kind of like you would rely on your therapist. You kind of take a note and go, oh, I've got to work through that when I talk to him next. And then sometimes, and you've probably had this and I've had this, but people will call you, I know my quarterly meeting isn't for a month, but I need to talk right now and I want to get through this stuff. Bam, you've made that connection. You've built that trust. And they're not asking you to come in and fix something. They're not asking you to operate their business. They're not asking you to work a shift. They're asking for your advice so they can go and implement that. That's that golden spot where you want to be with your franchisees, where a coach can be effective. If they're calling you up and saying, hey, I just needed you to train this material that the franchisor is making me deliver, we're probably not focused on the right things.
Yeah, no, absolutely. What do you think brands most underestimate when it comes to preparing for, whether they're bringing on their first coach or a new coach? What are some of those things that they need to potentially either have in place or make sure that they have from their coach to be able to do it effectively?
That's a good question. That's a big question. I think at the end of the day, it kind of goes back to the soft skills we were just talking about. And you've got to get engagement. You've got to get alignment, which helps you build trust. Because after that, the widget becomes whatever it is. The initiative is whatever it is. And there's core, obviously, business metrics that we need to, or tenets of the business that we need to establish. But at the end of the day, if someone's, I've always said the most dangerous franchisee is the one that you don't hear from much and they do just good enough to not do great. They just kind of agitate there because then when a crisis comes up, then they're in trouble and you really don't have that platform to kind of engage them, and if they continue to do good, that's ultimately kind of like we talked about earlier, where they end up getting disengaged on their own island. So I think a lot of companies really underestimate the impact of the field coach when it comes to the actual alignment and culture of their brand. Because, and listen, I'm biased because I was a field coach and the position is near and dear. But I really feel like the field coach is kind of the center of the hourglass. It's always flowing one way or the other. The franchisor is heavy or the franchisees are heavy. Someone's communicating heavier. The middle of that hourglass and what controls that flow is your field coach. And how they do that and how they align everybody, right? Because, it's easy to say, well, they work for the franchisor. They need to do everything the franchisor says. Not necessarily the most effective way to get your franchisees aligned. You
Right.
know, it could be, but we got to examine that, and that's where I think a lot of big not big companies, a lot of companies, in general, just sometimes miss how important and pivotal that field coach role is, because they're a therapist, they're a counselor, they're a coach. I won't say they're a manager because they shouldn't be, but they really hold a lot of sway. And I think when they turn them into compliance box checkers, that's a very real message you're sending to your franchisees. When you say the word value, is there value out of, well, this person comes in and checks a box every quarter and tells me I can keep doing my business? That's probably not the high level engagement. So, I think when companies finally come to the understanding that their field coaches are the levers that help them
Yeah.
and, get them to that next level. I mean, you've seen it before. There are brands that have field coaches that literally drive the whole future of that business.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I think another mistake brands make of all different sizes. We've seen it with brands that have 3,500 franchisees and brand new spanking brands that have 10 franchisees and now are getting their first coach. The lack of coaching framework and structure,
Oh, yeah.
and where it's really loose. So, and we talk about our strategic growth coaching framework and how you with industry best practices, we know what the cadence should be and the agendas, and we've got the tools and all of these things. But why do you think that is a big mistake, for brands not having some coaching framework in place when they've got, maybe multiple coaches doing it all their own way, or a brand new coach who's just trying to figure it out?
Yeah, I honestly just think it's lack of preparation. I think a lot of times, when it comes to underestimating the impact of those coaches,
Yeah.
the best way to get a franchisee to understand and move the needle forward in their business is not to have one big meeting, town hall meeting where the CEO sits up and says, guys, we're going to go have the best year we've ever had, right? And here's the tools, and your marketing agent will be in touch with you and they'll tell you what we're doing. It's the field coach engaging, going in there in a systematic, disciplined way, holding people accountable, like you say, being their true accountability partner, and giving them the opportunity to see their business through a lens. Like we talk a lot about KPIs and, the metrics that we use to measure our business. But it's more than just the scoreboard. I think professional sports does it really well. When you really think about it's funny because when I talk to people that maybe aren't onto systems as well, or they don't understand KPIs and how that really drives that, I always take it back to sports. Because if you reverse engineer the scoreboard on any sport, right? And this could be an Olympic level sport, Major League Baseball, it doesn't matter. When you reverse engineer what it took and the systems and playbooks that they ran in practice time and time again, you've heard it, how you practice is how you play. And a lot of times there is no practice in the operation. And so I feel like the field coach, by putting a systemized, structure in place, whether it's managing quarterly goals, having monthly check-ins, doing, biweekly touch bases, all of those things allow you to keep that system straight, which allows you to build those KPIs and that scoreboard more definitively.
Yeah.
And know why. And I think that's the bigger thing is, people look at the results. That's why I use the sports analogy. The score didn't just show up there. There's a reason why they did that. And it started way back in practice, whether or not they were catching those balls or not. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to just one last thing, because I harp on this quite a bit, is the one thing, and this is probably one of the messages I want franchise systems to really hear, is that just because a coach has coached somewhere else or is a good operator, they need, like all of us, to excel in our roles. We need training.
yeah.
And it's not just about the operations. It's got to be about the coaching skills and techniques. And you have been a coach for many years, and currently experiencing our field coach certification program. So can you just speak, I know we're a little over time, but I would love for you to speak about the impact that's having, and you've just started, but on on how, on your experience and how that, if you were going to go into, a role as another field coach, but I'm sure you're even going to use a lot of these things because you're a learner, you're a lifelong learner, and education's important to you, and leveling up and developing. I mean, how do you think that program is going to really level up field coaches? If that was you, how was that leveling up your skills?
It really comes down to one thing, and that is it is a comprehensive approach to training and structure when it comes to managing or advising or coaching franchisees. So, in my years as a field coach, I had a lot of tools, but it was kind of like, I had the hammer on one side of the house, and then I had the screwdriver over here, and this, my broom was getting dusty over here. What I've noticed out of the strategic growth framework is that everything is right there and it all talks to each other. So it's a system within a system. And so the nice part is you've got a framework that actually serves up everything you need to, rough framework. You got to fill in the blanks, but it's got a rough framework for success so that you can hold your coach or you can hold your franchisees accountable. You can build trust, and more importantly, you can get their operation to actually make progress on a quarterly, even monthly basis, depending on how you build out the goals. And so having all of those tools integrated into one place, to me, that's, you don't go golfing and say, oh, well, I'm going to take, the first 3 clubs I found on the way to the car. You go and get a set of golf clubs. And so why would you walk into any other game without being prepared with your equipment? To me, that is your equipment. That's what prepares you to play the game.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah, because that's what you guys have been really tackling now, and you're going to get to the coaching techniques soon, which is all about how do you influence someone in a positive way? How do you use persuasion? What are all of those motivational open-ended questions that you can be asking? How do you adapt your personality and communication style to meet the franchisee where they're at? Emotional and social intelligence, self-awareness. There's so many great things. Navigating challenging conversations and change management. There's so much great stuff in there that I think people who've come through the program, and I know I sound like I'm plugging the program, and maybe I am, but I see how the difference between somebody that has been coaching for 30 years goes through and learns all of these things, and it just makes so much sense and just gives them more techniques in their toolbox to be impactful with their franchisees. And without that, we're relying on, like I said at the earlier, people's nice personalities and likability.
Yeah.
But is that actually going to move the needle with your franchisees? Right.
Yeah.
I think there's a gap there. So,
Absolutely.
okay. Yeah. Thank you, Chris. I really, really appreciate you coming on. This will not be the first time that you will be a podcast guest of ours. So thank you for everyone that is listening. Love this topic. I mean, we're both have long history in coaching, and I just think it's really important for us to focus on our coaches and how do we develop them so that they're as impactful as possible. So if you're a franchisor listening and you want to strengthen your field support, your coaches, anything like that, check out our website, fieldcoachexperts.com. And I'm always happy to have a call with you just to chat a little bit more about your system and about potentially how AC Inc. can help. So thank you, and we will see you next time.